You're being paranoid, Renata. It was a work call. I told you that 9 months ago. Derrick's voice was flat, bored almost, like he was explaining something to a child who kept asking why the sky was blue. We were standing in the kitchen of the house I paid for, the house whose deed had my name and only my name on it, a fact he still didn't know, and he was holding his phone like a shield. A work call, I repeated. For 40 minutes. While I was pushing our daughter into the world alone. I had a deal closing. You had a woman in a hotel room 3 miles from the hospital. I have the location data, Derrick. I have the hotel receipt. I have the text where you told her almost done here, then I have to go pretend to care about a baby. His face did something complicated then, the practiced calm cracking just slightly at the edges, like ice under weight it hadn't expected. He set his phone down on the counter, very carefully, the way you set down something you're afraid might explode. Pretend to care, I said again, quieter now, because some sentences don't need volume to land. That's what you called our daughter. To her. You're twisting. I'm reading it back to you. Word for word. Behind him, through the kitchen doorway, I could see Mila's high chair, sticky with the remains of breakfast, a stuffed rabbit propped against the tray like it was keeping her company on days her father couldn't be bothered to. She was 11 months old now. She had his eyes and my stubbornness, and she had spent the first 30 minutes of her life without either parent fully present, because I was unconscious from blood loss and he was in a marriage with a woman named Cassidy from his firm's Denver office. I want a divorce, I said. And I want you to know something before my lawyer calls yours. I've been documenting this for 11 months. I have receipts you don't even remember exist. He laughed, short, ugly, disbelieving. Documenting what? You don't have anything, Renata. You don't work. You don't have money. You have a nursing degree you haven't used in 6 years and a joint account I could freeze by 5 o'clock today. I smiled. It surprised him, I could tell, because it wasn't the smile of a woman who'd just been threatened. It was the smile of a woman who already knew how this ended. Try it, I said. See what happens. But to understand how we got here, you need to go back 3 years, to a smaller house in a different city, before any of us knew what we were becoming. 3 years earlier, I was Renata Okafor-Lindqvist, 34 years old, living in a rented duplex in Tulsa, Oklahoma, working 12-hour shifts at St. Francis Hospital's labor and delivery unit. I'd been a nurse for 9 years by then, and there is nothing that teaches you about human beings faster than watching them meet their children for the first time. You learn who steps up. You learn who checks their phone during transition labor because a text came in from someone who isn't supposed to be texting them. I should have paid more attention to my own lessons. Derrick Lindqvist came into my life sideways, the way most complicated things do. He was a commercial real estate broker, sharp-suited and easy-laughing, the kind of man who remembered the names of restaurant hosts and made my mother, Adiz, laugh so hard at Thanksgiving that she cried. He courted me with the kind of attention that felt, at the time, like being chosen. Looking back, it felt more like being selected, the way you select a property with good bones and a low asking price, something you can renovate into whatever you decide it should be. We married in a small ceremony behind my aunt's house in Broken Arrow, 20 guests, string lights, my late father's watch pinned inside my dress because Derrick thought that was morbid and I wore it anyway. My best friend Priya Chandrasekharan stood beside me the whole night and, at one point, pulled me aside near the drinks table. He didn't ask about your work today, she said. Not once. Not what shift you're on, not how the Ramirez delivery went. Nothing. He's not a nurse person, I said. Some people just aren't. Priya didn't push it. I wish she had. The first 2 years were, by most measures, fine. Derrick's business grew. He started closing bigger deals, office parks, a strip mall renovation in Bixby, a warehouse conversion that made him enough money to suggest, gently and then less gently, that I didn't need to kill myself with those overnight shifts anymore. I liked my job. I liked the mothers I helped, the babies I caught, the particular silence of a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning when everything in the world has just changed for one family and no one else knows it yet. But I cut back to part-time, because it seemed like a reasonable compromise, and because Derrick had started controlling most of our shared finances with the easy confidence of a man who'd always been better with numbers. What he didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that 6 months before our wedding, My great-uncle Tobias Okafor had died in Lagos and left me, his only American relative, controlling interest in a modest but steadily profitable logistics company he'd built over 4 decades, along with the deed to 2 commercial properties in Tulsa that the company leased for warehouse space. My mother had handled the paperwork quietly, at my request, because I didn't want Derrick, or anyone, treating me differently because of it. I kept it in a separate account, under my maiden name, managed by a small firm my uncle had trusted for years. I told myself I was being private, not secretive. There's a difference, I used to think. I'm not sure I still believe that. The small warning signs came later, softer than warnings usually are in movies. Derrick started referring to my house instead of our house, even though we rented at the time. He made comments about my co-workers. Does Nurse Denise ever go home? That had a strange edge to them, like he resented the hours I gave to strangers. And once, 8 months into the marriage, I found a hotel loyalty account logged into our shared laptop under his name, with a points balance that suggested more travel than his stated business trips accounted for. When I asked him about it, he said, "Client entertainment. You wouldn't understand the industry," and changed the subject so smoothly I almost forgot to be suspicious. Almost. I got pregnant with Mila 14 months into the marriage. Derrick was, in public, thrilled. He told his parents, his college friends, his golf buddies. He posted an ultrasound photo online with 3 exclamation points. Privately, something in him seemed to recede, like a tide pulling back before a wave you don't yet see coming. I went into labor on a Tuesday in March, 6 weeks after we'd relocated to a bigger house in Edmond for more space before the baby comes. Derrick had insisted on driving separately to the hospital because he had, in his words, "one call I absolutely cannot miss," and he'd meet me there. He didn't meet me there. Not for the birth. Not for the first 31 minutes of our daughter's life. My labor moved fast, faster than my doctor expected, and by the time I was fully dilated, my sister-in-law Camille, Derrick's own sister, was the one holding my hand in the delivery room because Derrick's phone was going straight to voicemail and nobody could reach him. I remember Camille's face, pale with a fury she was trying to hide from me, saying, "He'll be here, Ren, just breathe," in a voice that didn't believe its own words. Mila was born at 6:47 in the morning. Derrick walked in at 7:19, hair damp like he'd showered recently, phone still in his hand, apologizing in the loose, rehearsed way of a man delivering a line he'd practiced in the car. "Traffic was insane," he said. And then this call came in, Denver office, they needed me on a conference line, I couldn't just hang up mid-negotiation, you understand, right? I was too exhausted, too high on adrenaline and relief and the particular disorientation of having just become someone's mother, to interrogate it that morning. I held my daughter. I let it go. That's the thing nobody tells you about red flags. Sometimes you see them clearly and choose, in the moment, to look at something more beautiful instead. The real inciting incident came 9 months later, on an ordinary Thursday, when I was doing something as mundane as transferring photos off Derrick's old phone onto a family cloud account, because Mila's baby pictures from that period were scattered and I wanted them backed up before the phone died completely. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't hunting. But cloud backups sync more than photos. They sync location history, message previews. And there, timestamped the morning of March 14th, 6:02 a.m. to 6:44 a.m., the exact window our daughter was born, was a location ping from the Marriott on Broadway extension, and a message thread with a contact saved simply as C, Denver, that began, "Almost done here, then I have to go pretend to care about a baby. You're worth being late for." I sat on the nursery floor with Mila's baby monitor humming beside me and read it 4 times before my hands stopped shaking enough to screenshot it. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't cry in front of him, either, though I cried plenty alone in the laundry room with the dryer running so the noise would cover it. Instead, I called my mother first, and then I called Priya, who arrived within the hour with a bottle of wine she didn't open and a legal pad she absolutely did. "You need a lawyer," Priya said. "Tonight. Not next week." "I need to think," I said. "Renata." She used my full name, which she only did when she meant business. "He called your daughter's birth pretending to care. There is nothing to think about. There's only what you do next." I sat with that sentence for a long time after she left. I thought about my nursing shifts, about all the fathers I'd watched cry in delivery rooms, humbled and useless and grateful. I thought about the ones who weren't there. And I thought, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that I already had more power in this marriage than Derrick had ever bothered to ask about. I hadn't lied about the inheritance, not exactly. I'd simply never volunteered it, the way you don't volunteer the contents of a locked drawer to someone who's never asked to open it. But sitting in the nursery that night, phone screenshots saved to 3 separate places, I found myself thinking about Uncle Tobias for the first time in months, and about a phone call I'd almost forgotten. 2 years earlier, shortly before the wedding, my mother had sat me down at her kitchen table with a folder of documents from the estate attorney handling Uncle Tobias's affairs, a careful woman named Odalise Ferreira who'd managed logistics industry clients for 3 decades. "You'll control 61% of Meridian Freight Partners," Odalise had told me over speakerphone, her voice unhurried and precise. "Your uncle structured it so the shares are held in a trust in your maiden name, Renata Okafor, separate from any marital assets, regardless of your future marital status." He was very specific about that clause. He said, and I'm reading this directly from his notes, "A woman should never have to ask permission to be safe." I remembered thanking her, filing the folder away, and mostly forgetting the scale of it because I didn't want it to change how I saw my own marriage before it had even begun. Meridian Freight Partners leased 2 warehouse properties, the very ones Uncle Tobias had owned outright, and one of those properties, I now recalled with a jolt that made me sit upright on the nursery floor, was leased to a company for equipment storage. The equipment storage company was called Linkvist Commercial Holdings. Derrick's company. He had been paying rent, for 3 years, on a warehouse he didn't know his own wife controlled. I went to the small fireproof filing box I kept in the back of my closet, the one Derrick had never once opened, because he'd never once asked what was in it, and pulled the original trust documents, the property deeds, and 3 years of lease agreements between Meridian Freight Partners and Linkvist Commercial Holdings. I read every line by lamplight while Mila slept in the next room, and somewhere around page 9 of the lease terms, I found the clause that made my breath catch, a standard commercial default provision allowing the property owner to terminate the lease with 30 days notice for any material breach, including late payment, and I remembered, with sudden clarity, that Derrick's company had been 38 days behind on the current quarter's rent. A fact I knew only because Odalise's office sent quarterly statements to my personal email, statements I'd been filing without fully reading for 2 years. I wasn't just a wife whose husband had missed the delivery room for another woman. I was the landlord of the building where his business quietly, precariously, depended on my good faith. I sat with that knowledge the rest of the night, not gloating, not yet even angry in the way I would be later, just quiet. The way you go quiet when a door you didn't know existed swings open in a wall you'd been leaning against for years. I didn't say anything for 6 weeks. I wanted to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with before I moved a single piece. Derrick, meanwhile, seemed to sense something shifting even though I hadn't confronted him, the way animals sense weather before the sky changes. He grew bolder. Careless, almost, in a way that told me he still believed himself untouchable. He started taking calls from C openly in front of me, stepping just far enough away to pretend at discretion. He came home late 3 nights a week smelling like a cologne that wasn't his. He told his mother, within my hearing, that he was handling some stress at home, in a tone that painted me as the stress rather than himself. And then he started with Mila's things. I came home from a rare pediatrician appointment to find he'd rearranged the nursery to be more efficient, moving the rocking chair my father had refinished for me out to the garage because it clashed with the new furniture set, a furniture set he'd bought without asking me, on a credit card I later learned he'd opened using my social security number from an old joint application, 6 months prior, without my knowledge. "You're being dramatic," he said, when I asked him to move the chair back. "It's a chair, Renata. I'm trying to build us a nicer life and you're stuck on a chair." 3 days later, at a neighborhood barbecue, he made a joke in front of 6 other couples. Ren used to be a nurse, if you can believe it, before she decided diapers were more her speed, and laughed like it was harmless, like the room wasn't full of women who'd clocked exactly what he'd just done. My neighbor, Georgette Ashworth Kimura, a retired family court mediator who lived 2 houses down and had, over the past year, become an unlikely friend over fence-line conversations and borrowed sugar, caught my eye across the patio and later found me alone by the cooler. "He's counting on you staying quiet," Georgette said, not unkindly. "Men like that always do the math wrong. They assume quiet means weak." "I'm not weak," I said. I know, she said. I've watched you for a year. You're patient. That's different. But patience has a shelf life, sweetheart, and you're close to the end of it. She wasn't wrong. Derrick set what I later understood to be a kind of deadline without ever stating it outright. He started talking about restructuring finances, about moving money somewhere more efficient, about needing me to sign something related to a home equity line just as a formality. I smiled, said I'd look at it, and quietly called Odalise Ferreira the next morning instead. Don't sign anything, Odalise said. Come in Thursday. Bring everything. Odalise Ferreira's office occupied the second floor of a converted brick building in downtown Tulsa, its walls lined with framed logistics industry certificates and a single photo of her shaking hands with my late uncle at a warehouse ribbon cutting a decade earlier. She was a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who spoke the way I imagined judges spoke, economical, unhurried, allergic to unnecessary words. I laid everything on her conference table, the screenshots, the lease agreements, the location data, the fireproof box's full contents, 3 years of quarterly statements I'd barely skimmed before. Let's start with what you own, Odalise said, pulling on reading glasses. Not what you think you own. What the documents say. Over the next 2 hours, with my accountant friend Bettina Orconquerez joining by video call to walk through the numbers, the full shape of it came into focus. You control 61% of Meridian Freight Partners, Odalise said, which owns, outright, 2 commercial properties valued combined at just under $3.1 million, based on last year's assessment. Meridian's primary tenant for the larger property, the Southgate warehouse, is Linkvist Commercial Holdings, which has been in partial arrears for the last 2 quarters. As of this month, they owe $41,200 in back rent and late fees. He never told me the business was struggling, I said. He may not know you know it's struggling, Bettina said dryly. Renata, I've been going through the joint account statements you sent me. In the last 18 months, Derrick moved $11,000 to an account with the routing number matching a Denver-based bank, in increments small enough that they wouldn't trigger typical fraud alerts. Separately, he opened a credit card in your name. I confirmed this from the credit bureau pool you authorized, without your signature, using an old joint application PDF. That's not just a marital problem. Depending on how the application was submitted, that may cross into fraud. And the home equity paperwork he wants me to sign. Odalise slid a printed document across the table. This would have used your family home, the one titled jointly, as collateral against a business loan for Linkvist Commercial Holdings. If he defaults, you'd be liable for the shortfall. He needs your signature because Oklahoma is not a community property state for this kind of transaction absent your consent. Which means, Renata, that you are the one thing standing between him and covering his business's debt. He needs you. He just doesn't know you know that. I sat with the number $41,200 for a long moment, feeling something settle in my chest, not quite triumph, something steadier. What happens if Meridian issues a formal default notice on the lease? You have every legal right to do that today, Odalise said. 30 days notice, per the lease terms you showed me. Given the arrears, you could also decline to renew at the end of the current term, which is, she checked a document, in 11 weeks. Combine that with declining to sign the home equity paperwork, and Linkvist Commercial Holdings loses its primary warehouse space and any hope of refinancing through your shared home equity, more or less simultaneously. And the credit card fraud. That's a separate matter, and a serious one, Bettina said. You don't have to pursue it. But you should know it's there, because it changes his leverage in a divorce negotiation to essentially nothing. I asked for a week to think, though I already knew what I was going to do. On the drive home, I thought about my father's watch pinned inside my wedding dress, about Camille holding my hand while her own brother sat in a hotel room, about the words pretend to care about a baby. Somewhere around the Broadway extension exit, the one that passed within sight of that married, I stopped feeling like a woman deciding whether to fight back, and started feeling like a woman simply choosing when. I filed the lease default notice on a Tuesday. 30 days, clean and procedural, delivered by certified mail from Meridian Freight Partners legal counsel. No drama, no confrontation, just paper, doing what paper does. Derrick found out on a Thursday, not from me, but from his own business partner, a nervous, decent man named Fabian Whitcomb who called Derrick in a panic because the Southgate warehouse's landlord had just terminated their lease over unpaid rent, effective in 30 days, with no renewal option, and Fabian had assumed Derrick already knew the landlord's identity. "Who is Meridian Freight Partners?" Fabian reportedly asked. "And why does their attorney keep referencing the Okafor Trust?" Derrick came home that evening pale in a way I'd never seen him, phone in hand, the same phone that had once carried Cassidy's messages now carrying the news that would unravel him. "Did you know," he said, voice tight, "that some woman named Okafor owns our warehouse?" "I've heard the name," I said, folding laundry, not looking up. "This could destroy the business, Renata. Whoever this is, I need to talk to her, negotiate something." "You could try," I said. "Though I imagine she already knows everything about the arrears. And the credit card." He went very still. "What credit card?" "The one you opened in my name 11 months ago. Using an old application. Without my signature." I finally looked up. I imagine she'd know about that too, since she's been talking to my accountant. I watched the exact moment the pieces assembled themselves behind his eyes, the maiden name on the trust documents, the warehouse he'd leased for 3 years without once asking who owned it, the wife he'd never bothered to ask about her family's business back home, and the woman standing in front of him folding honors with the calm of someone who had already won. "Renata," he said, and for the first time in 3 years, his voice had no performance in it at all. "Renata, is it you? Is Meridian?" 30 days, I said. "That's how much notice Meridian gave your company. I'd start figuring out where your equipment goes." He sat down at our kitchen table like his legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold him. His parents insisted on a family dinner 2 weeks later, an intervention disguised as a Sunday roast, held at their house in Nichols Hills, the kind of gathering where everyone pretends the elephant in the room is actually a small, manageable houseplant. Derrick's mother, Vivienne, opened with the kind of statement clearly rehearsed in advance. "Renata, we understand there's been some kind of business dispute, and we think, as a family, we should find a way to resolve it that doesn't hurt an innocent company." "There's no dispute," I said. "There's a lease default and back rent owed. Both documented. Both his company's doing, not mine." "But surely," Vivienne pressed, "if you two are having marital issues, you don't need to involve the business. Derrick says you're being vindictive." I set down my fork. Mila, in her high chair beside me, banged a spoon happily against her tray, oblivious, and something about her small, uncomplicated joy steadied me. "Derrick," I said, turning to him directly, "would you like to tell your parents what you said the morning Mila was born? Word for word. Or should I?" His face went the color of the tablecloth. "Renata, don't." He was 31 minutes late, I said, to the table now, not just to him. Not because of traffic. Because he was in a hotel with a woman from his Denver office, and he texted her, and I quote, "Almost done here, then I have to go pretend to care about a baby." The silence that followed had a texture to it, thick and complete. Camille, Derrick's own sister, put her fork down slowly. "You said that?" she asked her brother, and there was something in her voice, not shock exactly, more like a confirmation of something she'd suspected and hoped wasn't true. "About your own daughter." "It was a joke," Derrick said, too fast. "A stupid text, I didn't mean." "You meant it enough to say it," I said. "And you meant it enough that when I found out about the affair, and about the credit card you opened using my social security number without my consent, I didn't come to this family asking for sympathy. I came with documentation. Because that's the only language you've ever respected, Derrick. Numbers. Contracts. Leverage. So here's the number, $41,200 in back rent, owed to a warehouse I own, through a trust in my maiden name, that you never once asked me about in 3 years of marriage. That's not vindictive. That's just what happens when you build your entire life on top of a woman's assets and never bother learning her last name." Vivienne looked at her son. His father, silent until now, finally spoke. "Derrick. Is any of this true?" Derrick didn't answer. He just put his head in his hands, and for one strange moment, I saw something almost human in him, not the calculating broker, not the performer, just a man realizing, in front of the people whose opinion he'd always cared about most, exactly how small his choices had made him. Linkvist Commercial Holdings lost the Southgate warehouse on schedule, 30 days after the notice, and without that space, Fabian Whitcomb, Derrick's business partner, pulled out of 2 pending deals rather than risk his own reputation further. The business didn't collapse overnight, but it shrank, hard and fast, down to a 2-person operation working out of a shared office space in a strip mall off Memorial Road. Cassidy, the woman from Denver, ended things by text 3 weeks after the family dinner, once it became clear Derrick's financial situation wasn't what he'd implied it was during their year-long arrangement. Priya, who still had a contact at the Denver office through an old college friend, told me Cassidy had said something to a coworker about not signing up to be poor with someone else's husband, which struck me as almost funny in its honesty. The divorce proceedings were, by Odalise's standards, mercifully clean, mostly because Derrick's lawyer advised him against fighting me on the marital home or on custody arrangements, given what a judge might make of the credit card fraud allegation if it ever surfaced formally. I didn't pursue criminal charges. I considered it, sat with Bettina's advice for a long week, and ultimately decided Mila didn't need a criminal case attached to her father's name for the rest of her life. I got the house. I got primary custody, with reasonable visitation. I kept Meridian Freight Partners, obviously, since it had never been his to begin with. Vivian called me twice in the months after, awkward, careful calls, apologizing in the roundabout way mothers apologize for their grown children, not quite taking responsibility, but clearly ashamed. Camille and I grew closer, oddly enough. She started coming by on Sundays to see Mila, bringing groceries she didn't need to bring, staying for coffee she didn't need to stay for. Derrick moved into a 1-bedroom apartment near his shrinking office. He saw Mila every other weekend, showing up on time now, in a way that felt less like growth and more like a man with considerably less to distract him. He asked to meet me for coffee about 5 months after the divorce was finalized, at a small place near my house, neutral ground. He looked thinner, older somehow, though it had only been half a year. "I've been in therapy," he said, which surprised me. "Actually going, not just saying I should." "Good," I said, and meant it. Mila would need him to be a functional person for the next 18 years, whatever I felt about him personally. "I keep thinking about that text," he said, staring into his cup. "About what I said. I don't even remember writing it, honestly, and that scares me more than anything, that I could say something like that about my own daughter and not even remember doing it. Like I wasn't fully present for my own life." "You weren't," I said, not unkindly. "That was sort of the whole problem." "I'm not asking you to take me back," he said quickly. "I know that ship's gone. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For the call. For Cassidy. For the credit card, God, especially the credit card. For never once asking about your family's business, your uncle, any of it. I built a whole marriage around you without ever really looking at you." "I appreciate that," I said, and I did. "I forgive you, Derrick. I mean that. I'm not carrying this around as a weapon for the rest of my life. But forgiving you doesn't mean going back. Mila needs a father who shows up. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that, and it doesn't need to include me." He nodded, slowly, like he'd expected that answer and needed to hear it anyway. "Fair," he said. "That's fair." We finished our coffee talking, almost normally, about Mila's daycare, her new favorite word, the ridiculous rabbit stuffed animal she refused to sleep without. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something smaller and more useful. 2 people who'd once built a life together, learning how to co-parent one, without pretending the rest hadn't happened. 3 years later, Meridian Freight Partners has expanded to a 3rd property, a smaller distribution facility in Broken Arrow that I acquired last spring, in part using profits from a restructured lease with a much more reliable tenant than Derrick's old company ever was. I went back to nursing part-time, not out of necessity, but because I missed the work, missed the particular privilege of being present for people on the most significant morning of their lives. I started something new, too, a small scholarship fund through Meridian, named after my uncle Tobias, that helps single mothers in the Tulsa area cover nursing or trade school tuition. Georgette Ashworth Kimura sits on the small advisory board with me now, along with Odalise, who insists on reviewing every disbursement personally, because paperwork done right is a form of love, Renata, whether or not people understand that. Mila is 4 now, sturdy and opinionated, and asks surprisingly good questions for a preschooler. Derrick picks her up every Saturday morning, on time, phone left in the car. His smaller in her life than he might have been, but his present in it, consistently, which is more than I once thought he was capable of. Last month, at Mila's birthday party in my backyard, I found myself standing near the drink table, the same kind of spot Priya once pulled me aside in at my own wedding, watching my daughter blow out 4 candles surrounded by people who actually showed up. Derrick was there too, laughing at something Camille said, present in the ordinary, unremarkable way parents are supposed to be present, no calls interrupting, no hotel 3 miles away. I thought about that text message, the one that started all of it. Pretend to care about a baby. I watched Mila's face, lit gold by candlelight, entirely unaware of how close she'd come to growing up in the shadow of that sentence, and entirely certain, in the way small children simply are, that she was loved. She was right. She always had been. Here's what I learned, the expensive way. The people who quietly build the foundation of a life are rarely the ones making noise about it, but foundations don't need noise to hold weight. They just need to be respected, or eventually, someone finds out the hard way what they were standing on. So let me ask you this. Have you ever discovered, too late, that someone in your life had no idea what you were actually capable of? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe, because there's another one coming next week, and trust me, it's not one you'll see coming either.